Welcome to another segment of provocative conversations destined to provoke further thought and spark greater questions regarding God, church, and the religious establishments of both the past and the present. I am the proud heretic, Mr. Provocateur himself. Hello, I am the proud heretic, better known as the ordained heretic. Today I'm beginning a new subtopic regarding the divine season of the pandemic in reference to the things we must do, our individual requirements. When I first began to receive this information from God, these revelations, these revealings, these prophetic utterances, when they were given to me, I did not realize how tedious it would be for me to put these in a layout where I could give this much information to those who are actually interested in hearing regarding this information, regarding what God is doing in reference to what this season is about, what this pandemic is about. But as I began to put these different messages together, when I say put them together, as God would give them to me, I would record them. But even in recording them, typing them, inputting them into my computer, I began to realize, wow, there's so much information. There's going to have to be some type of layout that I can do that would help me to get these messages out to the people. And there you have it, where undoubtedly it was God, where I was able to see where God was going with the messages and realize, okay, God's been talking to me about the church. He's been talking to me about the world. He's been talking to me about the United States. He's been talking to me about the president and the political party. He's been talking to me about things personally to myself, to me in regards to what he wants me to see and to do. As I began to see all of these different things, I realized those are topics. So what I would do is go in and pull out everything that he said to me in each one of the 23 messages that God gave me, prophetic messages that God gave me, and I began to paste those into the topics, maybe 10 different topics. And there you have, and here you have one of the topics, one of the subtopics of what God spoke to me. But there was an individual who was very rude to me, very disrespectful and very rude, and he wouldn't think so, because that's part of his disrespect and rudeness, apparently. But it is what it is. I don't take down from what I'm saying. I mean what I say, and I say what I mean. So it is what it is. But when you've been up the dooney of God for so long in your own way, you tend to think that you have the right, you have the God-given audacity to say and to do and to come off on people like you do. But anyway, I'll talk on that perhaps a little more when I get to the message or the subtopic that will probably be the next up, where I will speak in reference to what God said to me that people will not listen. But anyway, that individual sparked a question to me And I had already run across this before, but that individual sparked a question to me. And that question was, well, what must we do? What must we do? What is it that we're to do to offset all of this, or however he asked it? When I got off the phone with him, God began to say some things to me. And that individual, I text that individual back, but that individual, and I said to that individual, what you asked me sparked some greater things. Now, God had already told me the things that we need to do, but that was one of the topics, one of the subtopics that I ended up pulling what God was saying to me out from the 23 messages, or at that time, maybe 20 messages that God had given me. And I pulled those messages out and began to put them under the header, a subheader, a subtopic called the things we must do, our individual requirements. So that's where we are now. Now, that individual never did receive these things that we must do, because he was not as desirous as he may have thought he was. And I realized that he was apparently not as genuine as he wanted to appear. But I'm not stupid, and there is discernment at work, and I realized what was going on for the most part, and I accept it for what it is, and I let God do what God does, and I keep it moving. Keep it simple and keep it moving. Here we are. So here we are. The things we must do, our individual requirements as it relates to this pandemic season. What must we do individually? Is there anything that God wants us to do in order that we may get through this season? In order that we might handle this season correctly? And the answer is yes, there are multiple things that we can do. So, we're going to take the time to go over those multiple things that we can do. This is not pointer number one. This is not 10 steps to, no, it's none of that. It is what it is. And I'm just going to tell you what you can do, and I'll tell it to you based upon what God stated to me. I will not add much of anything to this here outside of what God stated to me, in the sense that I will not tell you to do things that God did not say to me regarding. Okay. Well, on July the 11th, 2020, God said something to me in that message. And that message, and what he said to me in that message was, prepare yourself for what is coming. Prepare yourself for what is coming. Prepare yourself for what is soon to appear. Prepare yourself for the approaching danger. Prepare yourself for the devastation. Well, that right there let me know that God was saying, I want you to prepare yourself. So one of the ways that we prepare ourselves for what is coming, for the danger that's going to soon to appear, or that is appearing, and for the devastation that will follow. There is a preparing. There is a preparation. There are some things that God is wanting us to do. Preparing yourself means getting yourself situated in order that you might brace yourself, properly brace yourself, and then embrace, embrace the season, this divine season that we're in. You don't run from it. You don't try to change it. You don't try to alter it, but rather you reach out and you embrace it. So here we are. We're embracing what it is that God is doing in this divine season of this pandemic. Let's see. On March the 13th, God said something to me. God said, the shift. We're all in a shift, people, okay? We're shifting. God is shifting us. We're in a divine shift. This pandemic season is a shift. Now, I stated before, I am not one to use the religious words of the church or anything like that. the word shift is apparently something that the church world has been using. Maybe not to this pandemic, but in general, they've been using it. I mean, using it and speaking about a shift. Well, I never used that jargon. I never used that language, that word. But God said to me, the shift. We are in the shift. We're not just shifting, but we're in a shift. We're in the divine shift of God. God says the shift demands movement. The shift demands people to move. The shift demands people to move into position. It demands for people to move into proper position. And he says, whoever does not move with the shift will be left by the shift. So one thing that the shift demands is it demands of us to be movable, to be pliable. And we have to be willing to move away from what was familiar to us, to move away from tradition, to move away from culture, to move away from prejudices and the racisms and all the different isms that we are stuck in. God says it demands for us to move into our rightful position. Where in this season, our rightful position is wherever it is we are being told by the authorities to rest our little hind parts. It demands for us to move into a position of submission, a position of obedience. And that's what people are fighting right now. But if you're going to make it in this divine season, it's going to demand for you to move into the proper position. God says, whoever does not move with the shift will be left by the shift. That's why the church is going to be left and is being left by the shift, because the church has refused to move away from. The church loves Egypt. It loves the dispensation of Egypt. The church is not willing to be mobile, pliable, obedient, submitted. God says the shift demands change. So if you're going to be in this shift, you're going to have to be willing to change. Change how you think, change your attitude, change your behavior, change what you believe is right, what you feel is right. It's going to require you to change your perceptions. It's going to require you to change your concepts, your concept in relation to people, race, church, religion, God, the systems of this world. God says the shift that we're in demands newness. You got to have new thought, new attitude, new mind. The shift demands freshness. The shift demands fresh air, not the stale air of the past, but fresh air. God says the shift demands new thoughts, deeper revelations. If you don't want to go deeper than where you are, the Bible talks about leaving these beggarly elements and getting up off of the milk of the word and get on to the meatiness of the word. He surely wasn't talking about the Bible. Okay, but say if that is the case, well, let's go there. It demands deeper revelation than what you see written in a book. It demands deeper revelation than what your preacher, your pastor, your past dispensation offered you. It demands of you to see God in a different light, in a deeper way, in a greater way. It demands deeper revelations, not the stale revelations of the church, not the regurgitated revelations of the church of the past, but deeper revelations. On March the 15th, God says you are in a period of receiving. This is your period of receiving So if this is a period of receiving, we're in a period of receiving. We need to sit still and stop trying to give people stuff. Now, some people are to be in this season giving other people stuff. Say like with what I'm doing right now. This is what I'm called to do. This is where God has me doing. He wouldn't have given it to me if he didn't want me to share it. So some of us will be up serving and giving, but this is a season for people to shut up. That's what the masks are for, to shut up, sit down, and receive something. We've been up too long. We've been busy too long. We've been saying a whole bunch of nothing too long. This is a period of receiving. This is a period where you have to take the position of a receiver and receive from God. Receive what it is he's doing in this season. Not what he's trying to do in this season, but in what he's doing in this season. He says you ought to be open to receiving. So these are the things, this is one of the things you need to do. You need to be open to receiving. You ought to be receptive to receiving. Your receptors, your spiritual receptors ought to be present and active and submitted in order that you might receive. Your receptors ought to be open, he said. He says you are in a period of flowing. You are in a period where you are going to flow. When you're flowing, you're not fighting. You're not kicking. You're not flapping your arms. You're not doing anything but letting the wave of this season take you. Let the current situation, the current pandemic take you. You are in a period that you are to flow. So that's one of the things that we're going to have to do in this period. We're going to have to learn how to flow. Not how to figure out, but just to flow. I remember when my family and I had a traumatic event in 2012, and I was so used to always laying out my day and laying out my plans of what I'll get done in this day or that day. But when that situation happened and we were faced with so many things, so many wild things at one time from one incident brought about so many different changes in our lives, my household. And I remember getting up one morning and I'm like, God, I cannot think. I'm weighed down. And God said to me, stop trying to dictate your day. Stop trying to lay out your day to its exactness. He says, just take it as it comes. Go with how it comes. I don't think he said go with the flow. He just said go with it. Take it as it comes. And from that point on, for the next couple of months, all I did was learn how to go with whatever the course of the day brought me, whatever route that day brought me, just go with it. And it relieved me of a lot of the stress that I had. God is saying, this is how you're going to get through this period. He says, you are to simply go with the flow. You are not to resist the flow. Whatever the direction is going, just don't resist it. We have a lot of resisting going on right now. A lot of people resisting the flow of life right now. The flow of these masks and these gloves and these PPE gears, these shields and this sanitizer and the soap and this washing and these shopping carts and whatever else that we're having to deal with, these changes in restaurants and not being able to go to the movies and the theaters and not being able to go to games and not being able to go to church and not being able to, whatever it is. So we're fighting. We're resisting the flow of this season. That's where you will mess up. That's where people are messing up. God says you are not to question the flow. Don't even question the flow. Don't even question this season. Sure, you can question God, Those who tell you, oh, you don't ever say this to God. You don't ever question your God. Question him. Ask him. There is a verse that says you have not because you ask not. You are not to question the flow. The flow itself, don't question it. You go with the flow. Don't question these masks. Don't question what the doctors and the scientists are saying. For the most part, don't do that. He says you are to simply go with the flow. But rebellious and prideful people never do such a thing, would never do such a thing. God says, trust this period. Well, that's one of the things we're going to have to do. We're going to have to trust this period, this pandemic period. Trust this period that you are in. He says, trust the flow of this period. Trust the flowing of this period. He says the flow will get you to where you are to be. He says the flow is in sync with your destiny. See, this flow that we're in, that God has us in this pandemic season, it is not against our destiny, but rather it is for our destiny. Even more, it is because of our destiny. It is part of our destiny. It is inherent within our destiny. He says, do not question the validity of this flow. This is a valid flow. Well, is God in this? Is God doing it? God is in the flow. God is in the flow. Do not buck with the flow. God is in this flow. This is divine. This is not some man's doing. This is not China. Not China. Not at all. Not China. It's not anybody necessarily. The hand of God is at work. If you don't see the handwritings of God, it's because you have eyes, but you just cannot see. You have ears, but you just cannot hear. God says, do not question where the flow is taking you. We're not to question this. What are you doing, God? That's okay to a degree, but don't question whether or not you should do this, whether or not you should wear the mask, whether or not you should stop hitting the streets and get into your home. Listen to God. Flow with God. Allow God to teach you and lead you and guide you. Allow God to bring you into some depths that you've never been in him. To give you some revelations about yourself, about him, about this world, about this time period that we're in. God says you cannot go against your destiny by going with the flow. Well, I want my destiny. Okay, then go with the flow. God says you won't find yourself outside of your destiny by going with the flow. So if you want to find yourself in your destiny, just go with the flow of this season. God says get lost in the flow. Just get lost in it. Get immersed in it. Just think of a swimming pool, and you dive into it. God said, get lost in this flow. Get immersed in what I'm doing in this season. Get immersed in the flow of your destiny. Immerse yourself in your destiny. Immerse yourself in the movement of your destiny, in the momentum of your destiny. The momentum of your destiny is in the flow of what God is doing in this pandemic season. He says, allow the presentness of your destiny to take you. Allow the present moment of your destiny, because right now we're all in a present moment, and the presentness of our destiny is in this very moment, this very hour, this very season of the pandemic. And he says we are to allow the present moment of our destiny to overtake us right where we are in this period. He says, allow the momentum, the movement, the flow, the momentum, the energy of your destiny's present circumstances. See, your present circumstances are right here in your right now destiny. And there is an energy that is going on in this present destiny of yours, in the present circumstances of this season of your destiny, in your destiny. God says, allow the momentum of your destiny's present circumstances to overwhelm you. Let the momentum of all that you're experiencing in this season to overwhelm you. That's not in a bad sense. That's in a good sense. Let it overwhelm you. Let it overtake you. Allow your present state to flow in symphony with your destiny's presence. Listen, allow your present state, your present circumstances to flow in symphony with your destiny's present, or with your destiny. Listen, your destiny, I want to say that once again because I may have confused somebody. I'm going to say that once again. Allow your present state, your present circumstances to flow in symphony with your destiny. See, your present circumstances are in direct sync, in symphony, in accord with your destiny. What you need to do, whether you allow it or not, is going to happen if it's God's plan and purpose, in which it is. But inside of you, you need to let some things, you need to allow some things within you to accept and embrace and go with your present state. Why? Because in order for you to flow in symphony with your destiny, you have to go with this present state of life right now. Allow your present to be. Allow your present to be. Allow the present circumstances of your life in this pandemic to be. Allow it to be. Don't fight it. Let it be. Just let it be. God says, get overwhelmed in your presence. In your presence, in your destiny's presence. Overwhelm yourself in your present circumstances. Get overwhelmed with the presentness of your destiny's presence. Your destiny's presence is right here in your present circumstances, in the present season that God has the world in. God says, become your presence. Become who you are in the person of your presence. Your presence is everything that you're to be in your destiny. Your presence is right where you are in the presentness of your circumstances, in the presence of your destiny, in the present state of these circumstances, or what you're being faced with in the midst of this pandemic. God says, become who you are in the person of your presence. Don't try to be the person of your past. Don't even necessarily try to be the person of your future. First, learn how to live as the person and in the person of your presence, of your present circumstances. God says, allow your presence to rule over your present situation. Allow your present to rule over your presence, who you are in your destiny. Allow that to rule over your present situation. Who you are is who you are. Your present situation doesn't necessarily determine who you are. It is there to help you to become all that you are, but it's not against you. And your situation is not the defining of you, not necessarily. It is helping to more accurately define you as you become refined. Do not limit yourself from who you are in the person of your presence by the circumstances of your present. Do not limit yourself for who you are in the person of your presence by the circumstances of your present. Don't let your circumstances or the circumstances of your present in this season, don't let it dictate who you are. Do not limit yourself to who you are in the person of your presence. Who you are in the person of your presence is who you are in the destiny of who God has made you to be and who God has determined you to be. But do not allow the circumstances to dictate who you actually are. God says, do not let your present situation limit you to who you are in the person of your presence. Again, the person of your presence is who you are in God, who you are in who God has made you and determined you to be. Don't allow this season to necessarily define you. Allow it, work with it, flow with it as it refines you, as it brings more definition to you. But don't necessarily define yourself for who you are and for what you're going through right now. God says, learn to flow through your present by immersing yourself into the flow of your present. In other words, let's say it again. Learn to flow through your present circumstances of this season by immersing yourself into the flow of your presence. The flow of this season may be bringing you in some unknown direction. Undoubtedly it is, because where God is taking us, we've never been. Yet there is a flow that is in your presence, in the presence of who you are, that momentum of who you are. He says, learn to flow through your present circumstances by immersing yourselves into the flow of your momentum, the flow of who you are, the flow of your destiny. It's all together. It's all one and the same. None is working against the other. Now, I know this is some deep stuff, kind of, and it's kind of hard because I'm playing on the word present and presence. But these are the words that I heard God say. Let's keep going. Maintain consciousness of self. God says one of the things that we're going to have to do is to maintain consciousness of self. We have yet to understand personal self-consciousness. We've always been conscious of everybody else and everything else to a certain degree around us. But many have yet to become conscious of self, of the condition of self. God says one of the things you're going to have to do in this season is maintain consciousness of self. Maintain conscious awareness of who you are in the person of self by focusing on your presence rather than on the person of your present. There's certain levels of conscious awareness. And what God is saying here is that we're to maintain conscious awareness of who we are in the person of self, not in the person of our present circumstances, but in the person of our presence, of the person of who we are in what God has made us to be, destined us to be. He says, keep yourself open to receive. Remember, it's a receiving season. Keep receiving from within the flow of your presence, from who you are in your presence. So when you're going through this season, it's not about seeing yourself for who you are not. It's not even necessarily about you seeing yourself for who you are in what you're going through. But it is about seeing yourself for who you are in the person of self, in the person of your presence, in the person of your destiny, in the person of who God has made you to be. Flow in that, even through and in the midst of a pandemic, this pandemic. God says, as long as you stay in the flow of your presence, you will continue to receive. Because in the flow of your presence, you're just receiving whatever comes with who you are and of who you are encapsulated in, meaning God. Your destiny is encapsulated in who you are. You're encapsulated in all that God is. There's a flow that's there. There's a momentum that's there. He said, as long as you're flowing in that momentum that comes from knowing and flowing in who you are, you will continue to receive. Whatever it is you need to receive, whatever it is you're going to need in this pandemic season, or beyond, should I say, and beyond this season. He said, let your presence keep you in the receiving mode. Stay conscious of self. Now, there's two consciousness of self. There's a consciousness of self, of a conscious awareness of who you are in your nastiness, in your wretchedness, in your state of immaturity. There is a consciousness of self, and that is part of what God wants us to come into consciousness of, come into the conscious reality of who we are individually in our own messiness. Yet at the same time, there's a consciousness of self, meaning a conscious understanding, a conscious reality, a conscious acceptance of who we are in the person of who God has called us to be, destined, determined us to be. He says, let your presence keep you in the receiving mode. Let your conscious awareness of who you are in your presence, who you are in the makeup of who God made you to be, let that keep you in the receiving mode. Do not let the present circumstances of this season remove you from receiving. Because I don't like this season. I don't like what God is doing. I don't like how this feels. This don't represent me. This has nothing to... Don't allow yourself to get out of the receiving position, the position of a receiver. If you are on a football team and you are a receiver, you don't try to throw the ball. You only receive the ball. God says, do not let the present circumstances remove your focus from your presence, from who you are, from the flow of who you are, from the flow of what God is doing in the person of you, with the person of you. He says, allow what I am doing to overwhelm you in your present state. Allow what I am doing to overwhelm you in the conscious state of your presence. You can say in the conscious state of God's presence. Allow yourself through the consciousness of presence to be overwhelmed with the flow, the divine flow of this pandemic season. God says, go with the flow. Go with the flow of the current. Go with the current, the direction of the flow, the current situation, the current circumstances, the current regulations of this season. He says, I am in the current. I'm in the flowing of this. I am in the current season of this pandemic. I am currently working. He says, the current is of me. The current, the direction of the flow is of me. The flow itself is of me. The current state that you're in this pandemic season is of me. He says, trust the current, the direction, the current circumstances. Trust the current's flow. Trust that I am in the flow of the current. God says you are in the movement. Your presence, who you are, your destiny is in the movement. Is in the movement of this season. This season is a movement. This is the movement of God. The movement, God says, is in your destiny. Trust the movement. Trust the movement of this season, the movement of your destiny. Get in the movement. Get in what I'm doing. Get in where I'm flowing. Get in this season. Get in this divine season. Get in the consciousness of the movement. Get in conscious step with the movement. The church is not in constant step with the movement. People are not in constant step with the movement. So they're fighting the movement. God says, be aware of the movement. Be purposely aware. Purpose to be aware. Every moment that you remember, that you think about it, purpose yourself to be aware. God says, be purposely aware. On March the 17th, God said some things to me in relation to the things that we must do and our individual requirements during this season and even beyond. This season is a season of devotion. So that's one of the things that you need to learn how to do in this season. Learn what devotion is. Learn how to devote yourself to God. Have you ever devoted yourself wholly to God? Have you ever cared to devote yourself to God the way that you devote yourselves to people and things, events, and exercises? Have you ever devoted yourself to the degree that there is no other devotion? There is no devotion within you left because you've devoted it all to God, devoted it all to the spiritual things, all to your destiny, to what God has for you, to what God is doing with you, through you, in you. God says this is a season where devotion is of uttermost importance. Devotion is of uttermost importance. If God says it's of uttermost importance, it's very important. This is a season where your devotion is required of you. Anyone who is a part of the shift, God says, is going to be devoted. You say, well, am I in the shift? The question is, are you devoted? Are you trying to be devoted? Are you seeking God to be devoted? Are you trying to go into a greater depth of yourself? That deeper self, that more pure self, that purer self, that God part of self? Or are you still indulging in the self of your flesh, the self of your carnality, the self of your humanity, that self of the mankind? Devotion, God says, is an important element of this season. It is a necessity to be devoted in this season, God. He says it is a necessity to be devoted in this season. He said devotion is part of the circumcision. Remember, God said to me that there's a people that's coming who will be circumcised in heart and not in flesh alone. Circumcised in heart. That's what God is producing and bringing forth. God says, if you're going to be of that circumcision that he's talking about, devotion is going to be part of the circumcision. Circumcision speaks of your devotion to God. Just like Samson's hair, they were not to cut their hair, his tribe or his family line. They were not to cut their hair. That was their devotion to God. Well, and we know what happened there. It is a part, devotion is a part of the process of circumcision, because circumcision is a process. It's not something that goes down quickly, easily, softly, quietly. Circumcision can be loud. Parts of circumcision. It can be painful. It can leave scars. It can leave you traumatized for a bit. I know I had to see one of my sons go through that process several months after he was born. And it was very, very, very painful for him. He could not deal with it. It traumatized me seeing what he had to go through. I wanted to hurt the doctors physically, literally. Devotion is a necessity in the shift. A necessity. If you think you're going to get through this shift and be in this shift and not be a person of devotion, well, you're going to be sadly mistaken. You're sadly mistaken, and you're going to be sadly sorrowful that you did not devote yourself. Listen, you don't want to leave out of this season having never come into the person of who you are in this season and never coming into a conscious awareness of where your nastiness is, where the person of your reality, the person of your now is. No, you don't allow the person of your now to dictate to you, but you are to come into a conscious awareness of who you are in the person of your now, who you truly are. Stop hiding from who you are and start acknowledging who you are. This is a time period of self-acknowledgement, but we'll get to that because that is something that God told me. We should get to it somewhere along the course of this. And if we don't, I just hope to remember to talk about it. But anyway, he says, this is March 22nd. He said, this season demands substance. So one of the things that you're going to need in this time period is substance. Are you receiving substance in this season? I know that God has closed the church doors. Thank God that he did. I know that God is closing down this element, this entity, this almost enemy, okay, at enmity, this almost enemy called the church. I know that God is closing all of that down, but that does not mean that you are to be void of substance. Your substance comes from within you, from within your spirit, from within you becoming consciously aware of all that is and all that is not, or more of all that is, more of all that is not. This season demands substance. Now, since God said it will demand substance, well, that's one of the things, one of the requirements. It demands substance. You need to get substance in this season. Who are you listening to? Who's in your ear? Who's talking to you? Who's teaching you? Who's telling you what is going on? Who's speaking? Who's hearing from God in your life? Where are you at with that? Where are you at with substance? I've heard the arguments of people in this season. People are void of substance in this season. Their arguments, their supposed prophecies are void of substance. All it is mainly a bunch of regurgitated verses of scripture and whatever else. I purposely did not drown you all out with verses of scripture. Why? Because I wanted to bring you substance. I wanted to bring you something that was being spoken of in this hour. It's time out for us to keep running to a book. And I know that people will say, what do you mean running? You're basically telling us not to run to the Bible. Listen, that's probably your problem because that's what you've done. You've run to your sacred cow. What happened to the Holy Spirit will teach you all things? Well, yeah, what he does is he teach you what the Bible. Shut up. That ain't what it is. And let me tell you, I picked that up. Don't shut up. No, shut up. You shut up. Some of y'all need to just shut up. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And we'll still drink a glass of tea in heaven together. Yeah, you won't be in heaven talking like that. Yeah, you probably won't either have an attitude like that. So we'll drink some ice cold water in hell. How about that? Substance, God says, will let me go back. This season will place a demand upon those who possess substance. God, are you going to use me in this season? Do you have substance? See, this season demands substance. Are you going to be one with that substance? Are you going to do, God, what about after this season? Are you going to use me? Am I still going to get to my destiny? Is my destiny still on? Is my call still on? Well, the question is, do you have the substance that is in agreement that lends credibility to where God is taking us? Do you have the substance for the new world that's coming? Or are you still stuck in tradition? Are you still stuck in the church era? Are you still stuck in era, period, ERROR, instead of ERA? God says substance will be very important throughout this season. This season will put a load upon those with substance. Those with substance will see a great demand placed upon them, and people will demand greater substance. So you better have substance, and people are going to come wanting substance in this season and where we're going. They're not going to want the junk anymore. You're going to have to get rid of the junk in order to gain the substance. God says this is an important season. This is a serious season. He says, know the season. So that's one of the things we're going to have to do. We're going to have to do what we need to do in order to know this season. Know what season we're in. You know, the Bible in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it says there's a time and season for everything. Know the season, God says. Then once you know the season, he says you're going to have to acknowledge the season. Well, I'm not going to sit here and say, and there ain't no way that this thing going to be here forever. And there ain't no thing that this thing, and there ain't nothing to say that, and God's going to end this here now. And wait a minute. Acknowledge the season. And in acknowledging the season, you need to realize you don't get to dictate to the season. If you're dictating to the season, you're not even acknowledging the season, the type season it is. Acknowledge the season, he says. Then you have to respect the season. You're not respecting the season if you're bucking at every level. You're not respecting the season if you're fighting against the doctors and the scientists. You're not respecting the season if you're fighting against wearing a mask, if you're fighting against staying home and being shut up with your household. You're not respecting the season when you're not being sanitary. You're not respecting the season when you're out and about just doing your own thing and living free willy. Free willy don't have no dealings in this season. Free willy is going to be overtaken by free Cora. Respect the season. Embrace the season. Do not ignore the season. Man, I ain't thinking about what's going on. I'm going where I'm going. I'm going out of town. I'm going to the beach. I'm going here. I'm going to do what I want to. I'm going to church. God says, remember the season. Don't get so caught up or zoned out that you don't even remember the season that you're in. He says, remember the season that you are in. On March the 22nd, God says there's an undercurrent that's going on in this season. The undercurrent, if you're in a body of water, the undercurrent is that flow, that pull, that sway that's going on up underneath the surface of the water. He says the undercurrent of this season is going to take you with the shift. All you got to do is just go with it. He said the undercurrent is going to take you with the flow of the shift. But again, I say, you're going to have to just take it. You're going to have to go with it. You're going to have to trust it. People don't trust this season. People don't see this season, the need for this season to be trusted, or how would I say? Yeah, they don't see the need for this season to be trusted because they don't see God working in this season. They don't see that. This is not what they see this season as. God says, but for you to experience smoothness amid the flowing of this season, you have to flow in your faith. He said the undercurrent is going to take you with the flow. You just let it take you. But in order for you to experience smooth shiftings in the midst of the flowing of this season, the direction that this season is going to take you, he says, you're going to have to flow in your faith. You're going to have to apply your faith, not so that God can do what God is doing, but so that you can sit still and let God do what he's doing inside of you. Now, whether or not you let him do what he's doing, he's still going to do what he's doing. Ask Jonah. Yes. Ask Peter. Yes. God's going to do what God is going to do despite you, in spite of you. But in order for you to flow without choppiness, without feeling the rift of pulling in the opposite direction, in order for you to not get overwhelmed in a negative way, overtaken by your circumstances, you're going to have to apply your faith. He says, you're going to have to utilize your faith toward me during this season like no other season. In order to flow with what I'm doing during this season, your faith must be applied as never before. You're going to have to trust what I'm doing. You're going to have to trust that I am doing what is best. I remember when God gave me this. This was very hard for me because this was on March the 27th, 2020. And I was just I was only like 10 days into knowing what God is actually doing in this pandemic season, or what he was speaking to me about was in reference to this pandemic season up to this point. And I remember him saying, you're going to have to trust what I'm doing, that I'm doing what is best. We need to trust that what God is doing in this pandemic is best. Yeah, well, what would God be doing with this? What would God? Well, I tell you what, then, if it's not God, why don't you do like Kenneth Copeland and rebuke it away? Let's see what happens to it. Do you realize probably somewhere around 150 more thousand people have died since he rebuked that? As of this recorded right here, which is, I'm recording this, today is October the 21st, 2020. Another 150,000 people or better have died since he blew. Kenneth Copeland, please, I even pay you some offering. I pay you some tithes, some offerings, some tithes of somebody else's, some offerings of somebody else's, if you don't blow no more. Man, y'all made that worse. This thing quadrupled. Yeah, and then stop being scared, folk. Ain't nothing going to happen to you. They sit up there in the pulpit and talk about us all the time. Aren't you anointed? Well, the Bible says, touch not my anointed. Don't they touch on you? It's okay. Didn't Jesus touch on people? Okay. All right. We ain't touching on people. We ain't putting our paws on people. So we still good. And even then, we probably still be good, because some of them need paws put on them. Isn't that why God sent Nebuchadnezzar to his people, to put paws on them? All right. Isn't that what he sent Assyria for, to put their paws on them? All right. Okay, listen. God says your faith must be applied as never before. You're going to have to trust what I'm doing. You're going to have to trust that I am doing what is best. This season is for what is best. We're at 1 minute now. 1 hour now. We're going to go just a little bit longer, and then we'll close out and we'll pick it up on the next one. God says, go with the flow of your current situation. Your current situation is leading you in the direction of the flow. Just go with it. This current season is leading you in the direction of the flow. Go with it. Go with the flow. Don't fight against it. We're fighting against it, people. Let's stop fighting against it, America. Let's stop fighting against it, world. During this season, your faith is necessary for you to flow fluidly. You're not going to flow fluidly in this season if you don't apply your faith. There is a verse that says, for by faith we understand. No, I don't understand intellectually right now all that I desire to understand, all that it would seem that I need to understand. But what I do understand, I accept it and I go with it. And by faith, I understand all that I don't understand. Doing that, we're not going to get spooky with that, but we are going to utilize that. But let's not get spooky. A lot of people get spooky with that. And I say, now, how does that make sense? Well, by faith, I understand some stuff we just get stupid on. I'm not getting stuck on stupid. I'm trying to say, don't get stuck where you're stupid at, where you don't know, where you don't have proper working knowledge at. Don't get stuck there. Let it be what it is, and you just believe God that his hand is at work in this pandemic season. During this season, your faith is necessary for you to flow fluidly. He says the flow of this season requires your faith. The flow that you are in requires your faith. He says your faith is going to be required of you in order for you to flow fluidly in the shifting flow of this season. You're going to need your faith. We're going to go into choppy waters, and you're going to have to be able and willing to go where no man has gone. Listen, dig deep. God turns around in this same thing and says, the next paragraph, he said to me, this is a rough season. Listen, the waves are going to be rough. And look, I grew up in South Florida again. And in South Florida, man, those waves, when they're rough, you don't want to be out there in that water. Those waves get rough and they start whipping on you, slapping you in the face, knocking you down, going over your head, making you drink salt water. Man, that'll mess you up. God says this is a rough season. This season will be a rough season, which is why your faith is necessary during this season. He says the roughness of this season demands of you to utilize your faith to get through this season with fluidity. Fluidity is to flow freely, to just flow without interruption, to flow with rhythm, with accord, in symphony. If you're going to flow with fluidity in this season, he says, you're going to have to utilize your faith. You're not going to understand it all. You're not going to see it all. But by faith. He says the smoothness of this season is determined by your faith during this season. The smoothness of this season is determined by your faith during this season. The smoothness of this season is determined by your faith in this season. The smoothness of the situations that you will face during this season is going to be determined by your faith being utilized throughout this season. If you want to flow smoothly during this season, throughout this season, then your faith is going to have to be utilized by you throughout this season. This season will be very stormy for you. God told me this season will be very stormy for you if you do not incorporate your faith. If you do not incorporate your faith, this season will be very stormy for you. Without the employment of your faith, your flow through this season will be very choppy. The choppiness of this season is determined by the smoothness or the lack of smoothness of your faith, your flow in faith. This season demands your faith. It demands the incorporation of your faith. It demands you to incorporate your faith. In order for you to flow fluidly with the shifting of this season, your faith is going to be required. Now understand this here. God says your faith is not what is creating the shift or the shifting that is occurring in this season. Your faith is not what's causing that to be. Nor is your faith creating the flow or the current, the direction that this season will take. That is, your faith is not creating the flow that is in conjunction with the shifting that is occurring. He says, but rather your faith, or rather the flow, the shift and the shifting of this season, they're all due to purpose. They're due to his divine purpose for you. He says this entire season, this pandemic season, is not of a devil, is not of a demon, is not of mankind, is not of China, is not of any of that. God said this entire season is due to what was purposed. The sovereignty of God. Every bit of it is due to what I purposed beforehand. This is all due to purpose, due to divine purpose. All that I said right there would almost demand theological argument in theology. But that's not what we're doing right here. Every bit of it is due to what God has purposed beforehand. Is he sovereign or is he not? This is all due to purpose. All things work together, or does it not? This is all due to purpose, due to divine purpose. God says both the shifting and the flowing of this season are independent of your faith. The shifting and flowing that is going on in this season, none of that is dependent upon your faith. All of that is independent of your faith. He says your faith is not the creator of the flow of this season, but rather your faith or this season and the flow of this season is all divine. He said all of it is of a divine nature. He says the divine current of this season is what's creating the movement. The divine current of this season is what is creating this movement. It's not your faith. He says, although the flowing and the shifting of this season is not according to your faith, he says the fluidity of your flow, the smoothness of your flow within the flowing and shifting of this season will be according to your faith. So although the flow and the shift, the flowing and the shifting of this season is not due to your faith, your fluidity, the fluidity of your flow, the smoothness of your transitioning, the smooth movement of your life, of your thinking, of your attitude will be according to your faith. How smooth it'll be will be dependent upon how freely you flow in your faith, how willingly you flow in your faith. He says the direction and movements of this season are not created by you or your faith. He says the direction and movements of this season are both involuntary and independent of your faith. The direction and movements of this season are both involuntary and independent of your faith. But in order for you to flow fluidly or smoothly, to transition smoothly through this season in the direction and movements of this season, he says the conscious employment of your faith is demanded of you throughout the entire course of this season. The conscious employment of your faith is demanded of you throughout the entire course of this season. The current, God says, is shifting you. You are being shifted by the current flow, the current movement, the current direction of the shift, the current situations and circumstances of this season. All of it is shifting you. You are being shifted by the current. You are not to fight the current of the shift. Do not go against the current of this season, the events of this season, the rules, the guidelines and regulations of this season. Do not resist the current. Do not resist that which is in your current. Accept your current, the direction of your current, the smoothness of your current, the rockiness, the shakiness, the unknowingness, the unknown of your current. Accept it. Let your current take you. Go with your current, God says. Go with the current. He says you are in the creative flow of the shift, the creative flow of the shift. This season is divine, and it's designed, divinely designed, to bring you into a creative flow of the shift. The flow that you are in is going to require your faith. Trust where this shifting, where this flowing is taking you. Trust where this is taking you. He says, you, that's the key. You are being taken in the shift. You are being taken in the shift. You are being taken in the shift, and it's not according to your faith. You are being taken in the shift. You are in the flow of the shift. You are in the flow of the shift. You are in a creative period of shifting. No wonder the church is so messed up right now. No wonder so many people in the church are dying. So many people affiliated with the White House and the church are becoming ill, being sidelined, because you're going against the flow of this season. You're going against the directions of the authorities in this hour. The authorities in this hour are not necessarily the president, but rather it is the scientists, because really the type season it is dictates the authority within that season. And within the type season we're in, it's a medical, it's a pandemic. It's the scientists, it's the doctors, it's those who God has divinely gifted with wisdom, with understanding regarding a pandemic and regarding health and how a thing works, how a thing operates and functions. And God is using these people just as he's using preachers, or has used preachers, or has used people in the Bible. Stop separating the two. Stop bucking against the flow. Stop kicking against the pricks. Hopefully, you're getting something out of this. Hopefully, you're seeing what it is that you need to see. Let's go on to the next one. Thank you.